Well, hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Genestealer Cults video here on Nerdvana, and today we're going to be looking at our second detachment in this series, the Outlander Claw. And this detachment represents the Mad Max wannabes of the 40k universe, matched in their need for speed only by the speed freaks of the orcs. And so if you find yourself to be a fan of Fast and Furious, well, the Outlander Claw detachment is the one for you. And within this video, we will be looking at the detachment rule, the enhancements, the stratagems, and just the general fluff, lore, and background of this detachment. At points, we may touch upon the combinations, the killer combos, if you wish, within this detachment, and how to use it from a tactical perspective on the battlefield. But at best, we will touch upon that. If you wish to have a detailed strategy and tactical discussion on this detachment, well, we'll be covering that in a later video. So this is just a simple introduction into what the detachment is and what it has within it. And so, I hope you're sitting comfortably, and if so, then I will begin. Outlander Claws are rapid attack and exploitation formations drawn primarily from a Genestealer Cult's swiftest assets, though some cults hold their aggressive mobility as a core precept of their entire creed. The cultists of these forces typically exhibit a strong frontier spirit, used by their patriarch to source for resources and avenues of expansion and to identify and eliminate threats to the cult. These rugged pioneer bands employ numerous broods of Atlan jackal bikers and squadrons of light attack vehicles such as the Achilles Ridge Runners. These use their speed to outflank and encircle enemy positions and their heavy firepower to enfilade the foe and rake their vulnerable flanks. Broods of neophyte hybrids race into position aboard heavy-duty Goliath trucks, firing point-blank volleys even as they disembark and deploy. The crews of the Claw's vehicles are praised as cult heroes, their skills in evading the oppressor's clutches, rapidly jinking onto unanticipated vectors and plunging back into the foe's heart are second to none. Their detachment rule is called Rapid Takeover and is described as follows. Whether forming loose clans of wandering nomads or militarized rapid reaction corps, the cultists of Outlander Claws use their experience to launch assaults on prominent targets, swiftly exploiting or rigging them with proximity charges. They can deny resources to the enemy without yoking themselves to a static defense. On the battlefield, this is represented by the following rule. Double the objective control characteristic of Genestealer Cults mounted and Genestealer Cults vehicle models from your army. In addition, at the end of your command phase, if one or more Atlan Jackal units from your army are within range of an objective marker you control, that marker remains under your control even if you have no models within range of it, until your opponent controls it at the start or end of any turn. And so it's easy to see the sort of composition of your army that this particular detachment is encouraging. They are encouraging you to take maximum number of Atlan Jackals. They are your motorbikes, and also on top of that, as many vehicles as you can cram into your force as possible. The vehicles available to us being the Achilles Ridge Runners, the Goliath Truck, and the Goliath Rock Grinder. Now, I know you cultists out there are a sneaky bunch, and some of you may be getting very excited over this special rule, thinking you can combine that with your Brood Brother units. Lehman Russ with double OC, anyone? Oh yes, very, very spicy indeed. Hellhounds with double OC. Ooh, very nice also. But guys, I'm sorry, but Brood Brother units now, that's any Imperial Guard unit, can now only be taken within the Brood Brother Auxilia, which is a separate detachment. So there are no shenanigans like that we can pull off. So calm down, guys, calm down. It's only our own vehicle codex units that we can use that with. So the Goliath Rock Grinder, the Goliath Truck Transport, and the Achilles Ridge Runners, and of course our bikes. However, is that enough? Well, we can talk about that perhaps a little later. But for now, let's look at the various enhancements available to this detachment. Opening up with Serpentine Tactics. Described as with a chilling focus enabling them to identify ideal firing positions at a glance, this frontier assassin leads their brood in a coiling evasion from their enemies that suddenly changes into a lunging strike back. On the battlefield, it works as Genestealer Cults mounted models only. The bearer's unit is eligible to shoot in a turn in which it fell back. And at first glance, this particular enhancement seems to be, okay. It plays into the play style of this detachment, allowing you to not get locked into combat with a biker unit that you can place on the vanguard at the front and you just throw it at the enemy and don't have to worry about your shooting getting locked down because you can just fall back and shoot. It has some value in that sense. Having flexibility is always a good thing. But for 15 points, as it is at the moment, it's, in my opinion, too expensive, especially when you look at the fact that it is actually the most expensive enhancement in this detachment. I can't really see it getting any gameplay. Now, why do I say that? Well, being able to fall back and shoot on a unit with decent firepower is incredibly powerful. But Jackals, even with 2 wolf quads, don't get me wrong, they can do some damage. If you've got 2 mining lasers in there, you can really punt out some damage to a tank if you're lucky. But it's not what you're using the Jackals for. Jackals are used for harassment and they're used for their special rule demolition run. Okay, being able to inflict mortal wounds on the enemy whilst moving around the battlefield. Now, this doesn't enhance or enable that rule to be used any more than it otherwise would be. You can still fall out of combat without this enhancement, and as a result, you're not going to get locked down anyway. So really, the guns, as I say, on your unit are just not good enough to warrant paying 15 points for this rule. So, in my opinion, leave this enhancement at home. The next enhancement we're looking at is called the Cartographic Data Leech, described as following. This parasitic cybernetic implant allows its host to tap into the survey augers and proximity detectors of the cult's industrial transports. They use this leached data to guide their comrades' fire from vision slits and hatches even at high speed. On the battlefield, it works as following. Genestealer Cults models only. Whilst the bearer is embarked within a transport, each time that transport is selected to shoot, until the end of the phase, improve the ballistic skill characteristic of ranged weapons equipped by that transport as a result of the firing deck ability by 1. So I'm always a massive fan of enhancements or detachment rules that can be used to increase the variety of your force. Because variety is the spice of life, and variety is options, which means strategic flexibility. And this is exactly what this particular enhancement does. It comes in at a minor 10 points. So cheap as it gets, it's 5 points cheaper than Serpentine Tactics, and it will see some real serious usage in your army. The reason why I like it, as I say, is because you give this to any Genestealer Cults model, but obviously you're going to give it to an infantry model that can be mounted in a truck. And of course, at first glance, I was guilty of this also, you might be thinking that the best way to use this enhancement is to put it on the cheapest HQ unit possible, simply because those HQ's special rules, such as a Primus, for example, giving full rerolls to hit, you're paying 90 points basically for that. why give him an enhancement that kind of locks him into a vehicle when you could simply dismount him and give the unit he's with full rerolls to hit, which arguably is better than getting +1, or certainly equal to anyway. There's no real benefit. So don't waste this enhancement on an expensive character model. Throw it on, say, a Locust, for example, just a cheap model to enhance the shooting from a particular truck. Now, then you could argue, well, 10 points for that, even though it's cheap. Well, you're paying a character tax to get that ability, so it's more like 50, 60 points depending which character you go for. Then it starts to get a little bit expensive, especially as trucks can only carry units of 10. And so if you would have a neophytes in there, they're only going to be 1 mining laser. And I think the firing hatch is only for 6 models anyway. So it's just not that great when you're looking at and how it benefits the unit that the leader's attached to him. So it starts to lose value when you start looking at the itty-gritty like that. But then you have an epiphany. And that epiphany is the Benefactus. And let me tell you, this is the one and only choice you can make for this particular enhancement, because then this enhancement becomes exceedingly good. Now, the Benefactus is basically a walking las cannon that, if they fire with focused witch fire, is a 2-shot las cannon, may I say. So, particularly good. But when on foot, particularly vulnerable. So, keeping them mounted, at least for a little while, until the enemy armor has been softened and destroyed, where you don't necessarily need their las cannon brains anymore, their laser face. Well, this enhancement goes particularly well, because all of a sudden that's a very accurate las cannon that you've got mounted safely in a vehicle, and that if for some reason you were to fail your hazards check, you were to miscast, suffer a perils of the warp, well, those wounds can actually go onto the vehicle. And so we see a lot of synergy with this enhancement with the Benefactors whilst mounted. Next up, we have Starfall Shells. When they hit, these handcrafted sniper bullets radiate with a supernatural aura, redolent of the void's numbing chill. Muscles seize, fingers cramp, and thoughts slow as the sinister saturation takes effect. On the battlefield, it works as following. Genestealer Cults mounted model only. In your shooting phase, after the bearer has shot, select one enemy unit hit by one or more of those attacks made with a Cult sniper rifle. Until the start of your next shooting phase, each time a model in that enemy unit makes an attack, subtract 1 from the hit roll. Now, this particular enhancement will be taken by a Jackal Alphas. Why? Well, it's because it's our only mounted character, so there are no options for this. If you want to take Starfall Shells, you have to take a Jackal Alphas. Now, that's not a problem, because you're probably going to have 3 in this army detachment. In fact, no matter what detachment you have, you could always benefit from having at least 1 Jackal Alphas in your army. They're great models. They look fantastic, wonderful sculpts, and they work really well as leaders to Atalan Jackals. They're very good leader units. They have some superb rules, which we're going to go over briefly here. Why? Because it really kind of is appropriate to go over that to see how they kind of work with this particular enhancement. Now, the main reason you take a Jackal Alphas is not for its sniper rifle, which is its primary sort of shooting weapon, but you use it for its one of its abilities called Master Outrider, which essentially gives move, shoot, move shenanigans to the Jackal Alphas if it's leading a unit of Atalan Jackals. Now, this ability has always been good. I've been playing Warhammer 40k since the very, very beginning of 3rd edition, and Eldar, if I remember, were the only ones that could do that back then. And it's always been a strong ability since then. Every edition it's always been in a superbly strong and quite rare ability also. So having this in the army as an option Master Outrider just makes it worthwhile taking Jackal Alphas just for that alone. But it also has a special rule called Priority Target. Priority Target basically means that if you hit an enemy unit with the sniper rifle of this character model with one of its shots, then basically you debuff that enemy and make it easier to hit. You kind of highlight it, essentially. You put it on the targeting sensors of the rest of your army. And so for the rest of that phase, within that shooting phase, any other Genestealer Cult model that attacks that enemy that's been highlighted by the Jackal Alphas gets to re-roll a hit rolls of 1. So that's a massive boost. That's fantastic. It's a great model for enhancing the rest of your army. And so when you use Starfall Shells with it, essentially see this as an upgrade to that ability. It adds a little extra. So not only do you make him easier to hit because you're re-rolling hit rolls of 1, but you're now also debuffing the enemy. So if you don't kill them, if you don't destroy them, when they retaliate, they're now shooting at making attacks at -1 to their own hit rolls. So that is quite useful. Now, do you really bring priority target into the game too much? Well, yeah, you do, but bear in mind it's a heavy weapon, and if you attach the Jackal Alphas to a unit of Jackals, it's probably going to be on the move. So because it's heavy, you're only hitting on a 3 up with the Alphas. That's quite good, but it's nothing with a one-shot weapon. It's nothing to rely on. It's only going to happen every now and then. But luckily in this detachment, as I say, you're probably going to bring 3 units of Jackals, and as a result 3 units of Jackal Alphi. I believe that's the plural of Jackal Alphas, right? So you're going to bring 3 Alphas Alphi characters in here to lead your bikers. So actually, when you've got 3 of them, that 3 up the hit isn't too bad. The other option, which I saw done on Tabletop Tactics actually by Second Ed, is to take a Jackal Alphas and keep him on his own. Don't put him in a unit of Jackals, simply hold him back and use him as a mobile sniper that isn't going to move around that much. Just keep him in the backfield and take pot shots at the enemy, using or prioritizing that debuff of priority target and Starfall Shells as your main reason why you're taking this character unit. Now, that is actually quite an interesting take on it. It didn't really work that well for Second Ed, mostly because the Jackal Alphas doesn't have lone operative, so it's a little easy to pick off, but it's an option, and I think that should be play tested also, that if you want a really decent sniper mounted on a bike, just so it's got the mobility to get to other places and do things like secondary objectives, and that's something that should be play tested. That's something I haven't done myself, but I will be doing in the future, and will comment on a later video once it's been thoroughly play tested, but it's an option. And that moves us on to our last and final enhancement within the Outlander Claw, and this one is called Assault Commando. Sounds amazing. Let's see how it's described. An expert in rapid attacks from speeding vehicles, this veteran has drilled their insurrectionist cell, readying them to leap into the fray with stolen weapons blazing. On the battlefield, it works as following: Genestealer Cults models only. Each time a model in the bearer's unit makes a ranged attack, if it is disembarked from a transport this turn, you can re-roll the hit roll. So what this enhancement does, it turns whatever character you attach it to into a Primus, as long as they disembark in a vehicle. Now, that's actually quite good. I mean, if you really had a lot of units mounted in your army, if you went down that line, so instead of bikes, you went more for mounted mechanized infantry, which is one way of running Outlander Claw, then ultimately if you had 3 Primuses in your force and Assault Commando on another unit, then essentially you've got 4 units in your army that can re-roll all failed rolls to hit. That's quite good, although what I will say is that re-rolling the hit roll is best done in our big blocky units, so big units of 20 neophytes, for example, because they're really the only ones that got kind of the weight of firepower to benefit from this rule. Back at the beginning of 10th, this would have actually been quite good because, you could have 2 seismic cannons or 2 mining lasers within the same unit of 10 neophytes. But to get to that blessed number of being able to have multiples of the same weapons in a unit, you now have to have 20. So because of the way that neophytes have changed, going from the index to the codex, this Assault Commando enhancement has lost a bit of value that it otherwise may have had. Coming in at 15 points, it's not super cheap, but it's not expensive either, so it's relatively easy to get into there. And again, I mean, obviously, the one character you would not give this to that could take it is the Primus, because it already has that, so it's got a level of redundancy with him. But again, Assault Commando potentially has fantastic use for the Benefictor. So this might be, along with Cartographic Data Leech, might encourage you to bring 2 of them within your detachment, you know, for extra anti-tank firepower. Because, and hear me out here, having, even though a unit of 10 isn't going to pump out that much firepower, when you're using it with the, as I say, in conjunction with the Benefictus itself, well, what you've got is re-rolling to hit rolls and lethals. Benefictus gives lethals to its own attacks as well as the unit that it's attached to, and re-rolling hit rolls and lethals is lethal. It's a fantastic combo, one of the best combos you can get in 40k, and so that can actually really increase the rate of firepower that a small unit can have. It's something to think about, that's for sure. That concludes the enhancements part of the detachment, so let's move on to stratagems. And we open up with the stratagem called Along Shadowed Trails. It's described as follows: with raw speed and subtle misdirection, the Talon Jackals outflank those who believe them trapped. On the battlefield, it works as follows: it costs 1 CP to use. It's a strategic ploy stratagem and can be used in any phase just after an enemy unit ends a move within 9 inches of one or more of your cult ambush markers. It targets an Atalan Jackal unit from your army in cult ambush. And the effect is as follows: select one of those cult ambush markers. You can set that cult ambush marker anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 9 inches horizontally away from all enemy units and wholly within 6 inches of one or more of the battlefield edges. Until the end of the battle, you can only set Atalan Jackal units from your army to set up using that cult ambush marker. Now we see this flavour of stratagem in all of the different detachments within the Genestealer Codex for 10th edition. The first stratagem in every detachment ultimately allows you to try to protect and redeploy your cult ambush marker. The conditions on how to do that change with each detachment and kind of makes it more fluffy, sort of orientated to the detachment in question. And there are further limitations placed on that cult ambush marker when you use the stratagem, which limits its way that it can be used, but it still preserves it or gives you a chance of preserving it. In this case, what we see is that the ambush marker is literally moved to anywhere on the battlefield you want, which is great. I mean, that's a huge movement essentially that you can do. You can place it as far away from the enemy as possible if you just happen to mess up and the enemy outmaneuver you and get close to one of your ambush markers. But there is a restriction: you need to place it near the board's edge. That's the one and only restriction. And ultimately, it just represents bikers coming in to reinforce your army, seeing that the enemy is in proximity and redeploying, just literally speeding off as fast as they can and redeploying somewhere else on the edges of the battlefield, which is ultimately where the motorcycles will be coming in, literally driving in from the flanks of the battlefield. Now, this does mean that your cult ambush marking will be definitely protected. You know, it's not, as I say, with the Genestealer Biosantic Brood Surge detachment. It's not like that where there's still a risk that you're still going to lose your marker. This should be protected, but it is, as I say, restricted to the board edge. And the other limitation is that then only bikers can come in from that cult ambush marker. I like these stratagems. They have uses. They're a way of protecting your cult ambush markers, which are vulnerable, can easily be taken off, but it also allows you to do a little bit of bait and switch. So you can put a cult ambush marker somewhere where you want the enemy to go. You can kind of use it as bait, see if they put themselves out of position to remove the cult ambush marker. If they do, play this stratagem for 1 measly CP, and you can then place it somewhere else where you would actually probably have preferred to put it anyway. So it's a good bait and switch stratagem that can see some reasonable use. Next up, let's look at Devoted Crew, described as follows: With evasive maneuvers and split-second repairs, Outlander Claws marshal their rugged vehicles through the worst the foe can throw at them. This is a battle tactics stratagem that costs 1 CP to use and can be used in your opponent's shooting phase or fight phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. The stratagem itself targets one Goliath Rock Grinder or Goliath Truck unit from your army that was selected as the target of one or more of the attacking unit's attacks. And it comes into effect as follows. Until the end of the phase, each time an attack targets your unit, subtract 1 from the damage characteristic of that attack. So being able to reduce the damage you take from all attacks by 1 for 1 CP is actually really pretty good. I mean, that has a lot of use, a lot of value. It helps you mitigate any mistakes that you make. If you end up putting your truck a little bit too much in the open, you think you're in cover and, oh no, I've made a mistake, I'm going to get shot to pieces. Well, this gives you a chance to see it through, so to speak, and survive. Or it could allow you to play more aggressively, literally sort of go headlong towards the enemy, and hopefully act as a distraction that survives. There's nothing worse than the enemy putting out a lot of firepower for your unit to simply shrug it all off, then actually having to put in a disproportionate amount of firepower to remove something that it really isn't a threat anyway. Trucks are not a massive threat, right? But and so no one really wants to put in a lot of effort to get rid of them. They're just basic transports. This also has extra value within this particular detachment when you consider that, you know, your vehicles, they do have double OC, so it could be that you've put a truck onto a key objective that could win or lose you the game, depending on whether you keep it or not. And you play devoted crew that could allow you to survive an attack from a determined attack from the enemy, because of course this does work within the shooting phase and fight phase. So you can throw it on there, and with the double OC, maybe that's enough to take the objective from the enemy. And by having this, that can really mitigate it. You know, it doesn't do a huge amount against shooting. If they've got the right tools for the job, they're going to go through you, but that could really hamper a unit's assault capacity against that vehicle. So it is a decent stratagem that will see a lot of use. Next, we move on to Close Range Shootout. Described as, a cult's experienced outriders are experts in hit and run attacks and close range firefights. These skills are deadly when combined. This is a battle tactics stratagem costing 1 CP. It's used in your shooting phase and targets one Genestealer Cults mounted or Genestealer Cults vehicle unit from your army that has not been selected to shoot this phase. It affects that unit as follows. Until the end of that phase, ranged weapons equipped by models in your unit have the lethal hits ability whilst targeting an enemy unit within 18 inches. So lethal hits is one of my favourite abilities to have on my units. It has a lot of versatility because ultimately it allows you to, well, it creates versatility in your targets that you can go after. You know, it doesn't matter how low strength your weaponry is. You can still go after a proper big monster with this and potentially chip off the 1 or 2 wounds that it might have with small arms firepower. This is particularly useful in Genestealer Cultist army because our vehicles, as I say, are a bit like Dark Elder vehicles. You don't expect them to survive for too long. And it's our vehicles that really have our big guns. So if you lose all your big guns, maybe a little bit sooner than normal, then the close range shootout can really just help you get through that and take down enemy armor, which you might otherwise be struggling to deal with. Because, as I say, once your vehicles are gone, you don't really have many options available to you for that. So it's a great way of just sort of covering error or bad luck on that sense, or it could be used as a way of enhancing your higher end firepower, because of course this can be targeted on your own vehicles, so you can turn those mining lasers into something a little bit nastier. But in my opinion, lethal hits, it really only has value when there's a certain volume or degree of volume to the firepower. If it's just an inbuilt ability, fantastic. When you're paying 1 CP, you really need to get bang for your buck out of it. In my opinion, as I say, lethal hits works mostly within Genestealer Cults armies, within big infantry blobs of 20 men, 20 neophytes, that sort of amount. Anything less than that, it just doesn't quite work as well as you'd hope. But it's one of those that if you've got a one CP spare, you might as well spend it. And as I say, if there's just like an enemy dreadnought coming down your line with 1 or 2 wounds left that you've managed to chip away, you just want to chip away at, it's worthwhile at that point potentially going after it and using the stratagem. So that brings us to the halfway points of the stratagems. Now moving on to Rapid Feint. This is described as an Outlander Claw. Skilled riders and crews can use their enhanced hybrid reactions to rapidly alter speed and course, roaring after fleeing prey or luring enemy out of position and leaving them flat-footed. This is a strategic ploy stratagem costing 1 CP and is used when you're in your opponent's moving phase, just after an enemy unit ends a normal advance or fallback move. The target is 1 Achilles Ridge Runner or Atalan Jackal's unit from your army that is within 9 inches of that enemy unit. The effect is that your unit can now make a normal move of up to 6 inches. So as mentioned before, anything that has a movement shenanigan element to it is very powerful in Warhammer 40k. The movement phase is ultimately where games can be won. When you have players of equal talent and equal armies, really it's the movement phase which will determine who has won and who has lost. And so anything that allows you to move outside of the normal phase of movement where you would normally be able to do so is particularly powerful. So Rapid Feint, allowing you to move in your opponent's movement phase after they've completed their move, really is phenomenally good when used correctly. For the newbie players out there, you'd be like, oh, yeah, it's just a little extra movement. It's only 6 inch movement and whatever. It doesn't really matter. But this can really have an amazing effect on the battlefield when used correctly. It can be used to take you onto an enemy objective, onto an objective that's nearby. You can use it aggressively. So let's say you're part of the vanguard. You can move up and steal an objective that maybe the enemy has just moved off. You can move back defensively. You can move into cover. The options are huge with this. With Rapid Feint has significant value, especially in an army that really does benefit well from outmaneuvering your opponent. It really depends. The particular detachment depends on outmaneuvering your opponent. So having another element that allows you to do that within your force is huge. And it becomes greater the more you can do it. So the fact that you will have some Jackal Alphas in your force, maybe 3 of them, as I say. So your bikes are naturally doing this in their own shooting phase. Then you've got Rapid Feint allowing either your bikes or your Ridge Runners to do it in your enemy's movement phase. It is really powerful. The more you do it, the greater the result, because as I say, you can just outmaneuver and outplay your opponent. It becomes a game of chess at that point, but where you are 2 or 3 moves ahead of your opponent. And so Rapid Feint for 1 CP as well is a particularly good stratagem, and with a little bit of practice, as I say, this particular stratagem can win you games. Next we move on to Deft Maneuvering. Serpent fast, jinking and swerving with incredible skill, the cult's light vehicles appear to slide through the oppressor's gunfire. This is a battle tactic stratagem costing 1 CP and is used in, again, your opponent's shooting phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. Your target of this stratagem is one of your Achilles Ridge Runners or Atalan Jackal units from your army that was selected as the target of 1 or more of the attacking unit's attacks. And it affects them as so. Until the end of the phase, models in that unit have a 4-up invulnerable save. So we see that within this detachment we actually have 2 very defensive stratagems that look to try to keep your models alive. You've got devoted crew that is used on your trucks, so your rock grinders and your Goliath truck. And then you have deft maneuvering, where you're not using your armor to just simply brute your way through the enemy attacks. You're using instead your mobility, and so this, instead of affecting the trucks, affects your ridge runners and jackals. So between these two stratagems, you can give a lot of reactive defense to your army, and being able to give a 4-up invuln to these units is really good, because their saves just really aren't that good. And you know, if you have units of 10 jackals, the blueprint on them is quite big. Ridge runners, again, they're not massive, but they are vehicles, so again, hiding them can be a little bit hard when it comes to cover. And as I say, if you want to use your army aggressively, sometimes you can't always be in cover. You have to be speeding at the enemy at full power, right? And so being able to give a 4-up invuln to what is essentially all normally quite vulnerable units can vastly increase their survivability. Hugely increase their survivability. I mean, if the enemy is using the right guns, right, they can completely bypass your armor save. By having a 4-up invul, essentially you're halving the amount of damage you receive. It's that big. Okay, and for 1 CP, that can be really, really good. So it lets you essentially move aggressively through areas where there is simply, as I say, no cover, without really being punished as much as you normally would be for it. So it's an excellent stratagem that will again see a lot of use. Finally, we move on to our final stratagem called Encircling the Prey. Skirting the edge of battle, an Outlander Claw's raiders watch keenly for vulnerabilities, ready to throw themselves back into the fight to exploit any weaknesses in the enemy. This is a strategic ploy stratagem, again costing 1 CP. It is used at the end of your opponent's fight phase and targets 1 Genestealer Cults mounted or Genestealer Cults vehicle unit from your army that is not within engagement range of 1 or more enemy units and is wholly within 9 inches of 1 or more battlefield edges. The effect: remove your unit from the battlefield and place it into strategic reserves. Anything that allows a unit of yours to leave the battlefield and simply redeploy later on in the game is potentially massive. It allows you to protect a unit that would otherwise be destroyed or severely damaged. It lets you simply do it reactively, even if they're not potentially threatened, removing them off the battlefield and bringing them on, for example, where the objective to redeploy on an enemy objective or to redeploy on a friendly objective that might be under pressure, again has huge tactical and strategic value. Even if it's simply to redeploy a unit to better corridors of firepower. Let's say they simply just don't have the greatest line of sight capacity where they are, being able to redeploy them where, you know, they can start to do damage again has significant value. And so this particular stratagem, Encircling the Prey, is one of my favorites. Yes, it has to be used on a unit that is on basically a table edge, so that is the only disadvantage, but it's essentially the Outlander Claw version of To the Shadows, or From the Shadows, Return to the Shadows, my apologies, that your standard detachment, Host of Ascension, has. So it's nice to see that you can do that within the Outlander Claw also, and again just plays into the theme of being able to outmaneuver your opponent, and the fact that you can do it with a vehicle. Well, that's particularly spicy because you could use that on a rock grinder, for example, well, anything, Goliath truck or rock grinder, but I like my rock grinders, right? Use it on a rock grinder and move them. And of course, not only are you moving the transport, that's in this case quite deadly in combat, but you're also moving the unit that's deployed within that truck. Yeah, that's particularly good. So you're essentially getting 2 units for the price of 1 in that case. So a very powerful stratagem that again has significant value and will see a lot of use in this army. And so, as I say, I will be discussing particular killer combos and overall tactics that you can use with the Outlander Claw in a later video, perhaps demonstrated with miniatures or within games themselves. But for the time being, let's just have a quick analysis and conclusion of whether this detachment is any good or not. The detachment rule is quite nice. Anything that, again, affects objective control is always useful. Essentially, your bikes and vehicles gain the sort of objective, well, your bikes at least, get the kind of objective control that normal battle line units get. And there's nothing stopping you taking battle line units in this army either. So by having a lot of battle line units with mounted, mechanized within trucks, having bikes with, 2 OC per model, as I say, battle line grades of OC, and having vehicles with, potentially, a rock grinder has an OC of 6. That's nothing to sniff about. Just really helps put, what is going to probably be a relatively small army for GSC at least anyway, because these are quite elite units. Even though your army is quite small, it still has a lot of capacity for taking and holding objectives. And when you put on top of that the secondary aspect of the detachment rule, rapid takeover, being that jackals, if they take an objective, essentially make it a sticky objective, they don't have to stay and hold that objective. They can move on and they will still hold that objective until it is actively taken by the enemy. Just means that you again can keep the momentum, and you can really use this detachment aggressively, hyper aggressively, which is always fun. It's always good in any strategic games, certainly within Warhammer 40k. If you have the momentum and you can dictate where the fights can happen, how they happen, when they happen, when you're dictating the battlefield, you're going to win. The best way to survive a war is not concentrate on surviving, but concentrate on doing killing. Yeah, that's the way you win a war, and this particular detachment really plays into that aspect entirely. Now, it's not just a detachment rule that makes or breaks a detachment. You do need to look at the whole aspect of it. So the units that it enhances is important. Jackals are brilliant. Atalan Jackals are superb models. They're great anyway. They're a little bit vulnerable. They're a little bit on the soft side. They've gotten a little bit better now that they've got stealth in the codex compared to their index army list. But they still, they're not the best, right? At taking firepower. You do have to use that mobility and that kind of, as I say, those movement shenanigans to keep yourself out of harm. Because if the enemy does open fire with you with a determined army and with the right weapons, you are going to go down. You are vulnerable. But, as I say, you can mitigate that with your movement. And also, as I say, with some of the stratagems that I discussed earlier. And, of course, your vehicles also benefit from the detachment rule, not just your bikers. Our vehicles are not the best in the game. The rock grinder used to be okay. It used to have a place in combat, but again, it's been nerfed a little bit with the way that the rules have changed from index to codex, and so it has its place still, but it's not the best. And so our vehicles that we have are just a little bit subpar. The only ones that are actually really good and auto-include in every army list I have, regardless of detachment, are the Achilles Ridge Runners. These are very good because they debuff the enemy, they're mobile, they've got a reasonable amount of toughness and wounds, not great, but for what they are, the points and that, they've got reasonable resilience, and they can actually have pretty decent firepower also. So you're going to be wanting to max out with this army really on ridge runners and bikers, and then you fit in as many trucks and rock grinders as you can with whatever points you've got left, just to get. And the reason you take the trucks is not so much for the trucks themselves, although again they have value because they have pretty much the only tank weaponry that we have in this army. But also you're really taking them because they act as transports, which is really where the enhancements come. The enhancements as a whole are not good. Okay, when we looked at Bystantic Broodsurge, that had every enhancement, as far as I'm aware, was, as I said, either an A+ or S tier enhancement. They were really good. I'm struggling to find one that I just think is like, oh yeah, an auto include with this particular, detachment. You don't really have to take any of these enhancements in your army. They're okay, but they're not great. Okay, Serpentine Tactics, as I say, is just meh. It's okay, but it's the most expensive, and it's perhaps the worst enhancement here, so I wouldn't take it myself. Cartographic Data Leech, that is quite good, as I say, combining it with a Benefactus, but do you want a benefit to send your army. It really depends how much anti-tank firepower you're bringing into your army from elsewhere. You can never have too much anti-tank firepower, right? But you don't want to be bringing so much along that you have to compromise elsewhere in your army. Starfall shells are nice. Okay, again, they're okay, but the Colt sniper rifle isn't the most accurate on the move. It hits on a 3-up. If you were to stay still, it hits on a 2-up. That's when Starfall shells can be really, really decent, because you've got some really proper, reliable firepower there. But one shot hitting on a 3-up, because you probably, to get the most out of your Primus, you probably Alphas, your Jackal Alpha, you really need to be attaching them to the Jackals, which you're going to have no shortage of. So Starfall shells, no, you're probably not again going to be using them. Assault Commando, yeah, again, if you have mounted infantry and you have characters with those mounted infantry, you might just want to take mounted infantry and just use them as a mobile way of going after objectives. That might be the better way to do it. Why put characters in with your mounted units? Because that just makes them expensive and doesn't do a huge amount. As described before, a lot of the characters that we have in GSC really benefit from being in big blobs of 20 neophytes, rather than the ones that we would want to bring to the Claw, for example, prefer to go with neophytes. So why would you? It would be better to actually take those points, instead of getting 10 neophytes and a leader, why don't I get some metamorphs? You don't need to support them necessarily. Metamorphs might go down a little bit better in this case. Or why not even aberrants if you want something that can take a beating also? But regards this, these particular enhancements don't benefit these units. It's for ranged units only, and for me the only option there is neophyte. So as I say, you might, in my personal opinion, do best not to use any of these enhancements. They're a waste of points unless you've just got a 10-point spare and you want to throw it on something. And I certainly wouldn't bring infantry characters into this army simply to be able to use a couple of these enhancements, because I feel like it's just a point sink that you don't need to put in. At the end of the day, you could, instead of having a character, you could probably get another Achilles Ridge Runner. A character with an enhancement for certainly is the same sort of cost as an Achilles Ridge Runner, which will serve you much, much, much better. The Strategems, on the other hand, luckily kind of make up for the enhancements. They're pretty good. Every single one of them is usable. The only one that I really probably wouldn't use all too often, although it again has its time and place, but you won't see regular use, is Close Range Shootout. All the others have value. All the others have a clear time for when to be used, and will most likely bring about good effect onto the battlefield, can really help you win games. And so the enhancements, 5 out of 6 good. One of them is very, very, very circumstantial. And you could argue along Shadow Trails as well, again, is circumstantial, because if you play the army right, you shouldn't be you're losing your cult markers. But as I say, playing it right, if you're using the cult markers as bait and switch, actually, again, along Shadow Trails allows you to do that. So there is value in doing that also. So as I say, 5 out of 6 stratagems, not too shabby really at all. Enhancements, 0 out of 6. Detachment more, 2 thumbs up. So overall, a pretty good detachment, and one that I imagine is very fun to play with. We all love Mad Max, right? We all love Fury Road. Not everyone likes the new Furiosa movie. I do. I thought it was absolutely brilliant and actually was better than Fury Road. But hey, some of you might hate me for that. And if you're subscribed, might unsubscribe for me simply saying that. But regardless, the theme of the army is uber cool, and that has value in its own right. So guys, go out there, test it, put in the comments how you found this particular detachment. Maybe you found it useful, good, A tier, B tier, so on and so forth. Let us know what you found, and also share with us your killer combos and strategies that you use to help you win games. And I will try to include them, if I haven't already thought of them, in my upcoming video where I look at the detachments in a more detailed fashion. However, my next video will either be covering the Xenocreed Congregation or the Host of Ascension. In the meantime, guys, thank you very much for watching my video. Thank you for visiting my channel. Like, comment, subscribe. Visit my Etsy store for all your best geek gifts out there. and I will see you soon. Bye bye.